November 19th, 1274, Hakata Bay, Kyushu. By sunset, over 900 samurai lay dead or wounded on the beaches. Warriors who had never lost a battle on Japanese soil. Warriors who believed individual combat was the only honorable way to fight. Warriors who had trained their entire lives for single duels, obliterated in coordinated volleys by an enemy that refused to fight them one-on-one. The Mongol-led Yuan force that landed that day numbered roughly 23,000 troops. The samurai defending Hakata, they outnumbered the invaders on paper. They had home terrain, they had generations of martial tradition, and they were driven back in hours. This shouldn't have been possible. But the samurai had never faced an enemy like this. Armies that moved as one organism, archers who fired in synchronized waves, and something that froze even the bravest warriors in their tracks. Explosive projectiles that detonated mid-air, showering shrapnel and fire across the battlefield. Weapons Japan didn't even have words for yet. By the time the Mongols withdrew to their ships, Japan's military class understood a terrifying truth. Everything they knew about warfare was obsolete. This is the story of the battle that shattered samurai confidence, the ruler who almost conquered Japan, and the invasion that changed Japanese history forever. The Great Khan turns east to understand why 23,000 soldiers crossed the sea to invade Japan. You need to understand one man's ambition. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruler of the largest contiguous empire in human history. By the 1260s, Kublai controlled everything from the Korean peninsula to the borders of Persia. He had founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271 and spent years grinding down the southern Song dynasty of China. By 1279, that conquest would be complete, giving him access to wealth, manpower, and shipbuilding technology that dwarfed anything the world had seen. But there was a problem. An island nation to the east that refused to acknowledge his supremacy. Japan. Between 1268 and 1273, Kublai sent envoy after envoy through Korea, already a Mongol vassal state, demanding that Japan submit, pay tribute, bow. The messages reached Japan's Kamakura shogunate. The regent, a man named Hojo Tokimune, read Kublai's demands. He sent the envoys back empty-handed. No response, no negotiation. Just silence. Think about that. A 23-year-old regent looked at letters from the most powerful man on earth and chose to ignore them. Kublai's advisors called Japan the arrow that hasn't been shot yet. Unfinished business. A loose thread in an empire that tolerated no loose threads. By 1274, diplomacy was over. Here's where Japan's confidence came from, and why it was about to shatter. For over 600 years, no foreign army had invaded Japanese soil. 6 centuries of isolation. 6 centuries of developing a warrior culture that had never been tested against an outside enemy. The samurai class dominated Japanese warfare. Their code was built on personal honor, individual glory, and one-on-one combat. Before a battle, samurai would announce their names, their lineages, their accomplishments. They sought worthy opponents. They expected their enemies to do the same. War wasn't mass slaughter. It was a collection of duels. Stay with me, because this mindset is about to collide with something it cannot comprehend. The samurai had no concept of coordinated infantry tactics, no experience with armies that moved as single units, no defense against enemies who didn't care about your name, your honor, or your challenge. Geographic isolation had made Japan confident. It had also made Japan blind. In autumn 1274, Kublai Khan assembled a fleet, 900 ships, 23,000 soldiers, Mongol cavalry commanders, Chinese infantry, Korean auxiliaries. A multi-ethnic army of conquest, held together by the most efficient military command structure on the planet. The arrow was finally being shot. The invasion begins October 1274. The fleet departs the Korean peninsula. The crossing takes weeks. 900 ships cutting through autumn seas packed with horses, weapons, siege equipment, and something else, ceramic shells filled with gunpowder. The samurai don't know these exist yet. They will. November 5th, Tsushima Island, the first Japanese territory in the invasion's path. A small garrison commanded by a samurai named So Sukakuni. 80 warriors, maybe 100. They see the horizon fill with sails. So Sukakuni doesn't run. He rides to the beach with his men, ready to fight. Here's where it gets strange. The samurai expected combat. What they got was annihilation. Mongol forces didn't challenge them to duels. They landed in waves, formed ranks, and advanced. So Sukakuni died on the beach. His entire garrison died with him. The civilian population was massacred or enslaved. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. November 13th. Iki Island. Same story. The garrison commander, Taira Kagetaka, fights to the last man. The island falls in hours. 2 islands, 2 garrisons, 0 Mongol setbacks. Watch what happens next. The fleet anchors off Hakata Bay, northern Kyushu. This is the real target. Dazaifu, the administrative heart of western Japan, lies just inland. Take Dazaifu, and you control the region. Control the region, and the path to Kyoto opens. The geography favors invasion, open beaches, gentle slopes, perfect for amphibious landing. Japanese defenders gather at the shoreline. Samurai from Kyushu's most powerful clans, the Otomo, the Shimazu, the Shoni. Thousands of warriors, armor gleaming, horses stamping, no fortifications, no walls, no coordinated defense plan. They're waiting for the enemy to land, announce themselves, and fight with honor. The sun rises on November 19th, 1274. The Mongols have no intention of fighting with honor. The battle that changed everything. The first boats hit the beach at multiple points, simultaneously. Not one landing. Many. The samurai commanders scramble to respond. Some ride toward the nearest enemy cluster. Others hesitate, unsure which threat to address. A samurai named Takazaki Suenaga, remember that name, kicks his horse forward. He's a minor warrior, hungry for glory. He charges toward a group of dismounting Mongol soldiers, ready to announce himself and claim a worthy opponent. What happens next will haunt Japanese military thinking for generations. Takazaki screams his name, his lineage, his challenge. The Mongols don't respond. They form a tight cluster, shields up, spears out. 10, 15 soldiers moving as one. Takazaki charges anyway. Arrows fly. Not one arrow. Dozens. A volley. Then another. His horse staggers. He takes a shaft to the arm. His attendants are cut down around him. No duel, no acknowledgement, no honor. Just efficient killing. This scene repeated across the entire beachfront. Samurai after samurai rode forward expecting Tatakai-style combat. The announcement, the challenge, the clash of champions. What they found were formations, shield walls, soldiers who refused to break ranks, refused to engage individually, refused to play by any rules the samurai understood. Here's where it gets worse. The Mongol composite bow was shorter than the Japanese Yumi longbow, but it fired faster. Much faster. And Mongol archers didn't aim at specific targets. They fired in synchronized waves, creating kill zones, sheets of arrows falling like rain. The samurai longbow was powerful, deadly accurate, designed for mounted warriors picking off individual enemies. It was useless against volley fire. Samurai tried to close the distance. Mongol light cavalry intercepted them, feigned retreats that drew the Japanese into traps, encirclement maneuvers that cut off escape routes. Every tactic the samurai knew was countered by a tactic they'd never seen. And then came the weapons that broke something in the samurai mind. Hollow ceramic spheres, iron shells packed with gunpowder, launched from catapults or hurled by hand. The samurai had no word for these weapons, no concept of what they were. The first explosions shattered the morning air. Spheres detonated mid-flight or on impact, spraying iron shrapnel, shooting flames in every direction, creating a sound like thunder cracking directly overhead. Horses panicked. War horses trained for the chaos of battle, animals that had charged into sword fights without flinching. They screamed and threw their riders. Samurai who had never known fear felt something cold grip their stomachs. Some thought it was sorcery, dark magic, thunder summoned by foreign shamans. It wasn't magic, it was gunpowder, technology China had developed centuries earlier, now weaponized by the Mongol war machine. Japan was 600 years behind. We know these weapons were real. In the 1980s and 2010s, archaeologists discovered shipwrecks off Takashima Island, remnants of the Mongol fleet. CT scans of recovered artifacts revealed exactly what the samurai faced: ceramic shells with iron fragments still embedded inside. Shrapnel bombs, the physical proof of Japan's nightmare. The Moko Shurai Ekotoba scrolls, commissioned around 1293 by that same Takazaki Suenaga who charged the beach, show these explosions in vivid detail. Bursts of flame, sparks radiating outward, warriors recoiling from blasts. This wasn't legend. This was documented. This was real. Everything they knew about warfare was obsolete. The push inland. By midday, the beachhead belonged to the Mongols. Samurai units that hadn't been destroyed were falling back in disorder. No unified command. No coordinated retreat. Clan leaders shouted conflicting orders. Warriors who had trained their entire lives to fight alone discovered that individual courage meant nothing against an army that moved as one organism. The Mongol objective was clear: Dazaifu, the administrative capital. Take it, and Kyushu falls. Kyushu falls, and the invasion becomes a conquest. Fighting spread inland. Samurai attempted to regroup at temples, at shrines, at any defensible position they could find. But the Mongol advance continued, methodical, relentless, professional. Think about this from the Japanese perspective. These warriors had spent their lives believing they were the greatest fighters in the world. Their entire identity was built on martial supremacy. And now they were being swept aside like children. The casualty count climbed. Hundreds dead. Hundreds more wounded. Morale didn't just drop. It collapsed. By late afternoon, the defenders had been pushed miles from the original landing sites. Dazaifu was in danger. And then, something shifted. The withdrawal evening fell on November 19th. The Mongol commanders called a halt. Instead of pressing their advantage, instead of marching on Dazaifu while the samurai were broken and scattered, the invasion force withdrew, back to the Hamtasam beaches, back to the ships. Why? Stay with me, because historians still argue about this. Some sources say it was always the plan: a reconnaissance in force, test Japanese defenses, measure their strength, return with a larger army for the real conquest. The Mongols had gathered intelligence. Mission accomplished. Other sources point to casualties among key commanders, supply concerns, warnings from Korean sailors about incoming weather. Here's what we know for certain. The fleet put to sea that night or the following morning, and then the storm hit. Severe weather, possibly a typhoon, possibly a powerful autumn gale, struck the Mongol fleet in open water. Ships that had survived the crossing from Korea broke apart in the waves. Soldiers who had conquered the beach drowned in the darkness. Modern estimates suggest over 200 ships were lost. Thousands of troops killed, not by samurai swords, but by the sea itself. This wasn't the famous kamikaze. That storm comes later, in 1281, but it was devastating enough to end the first invasion. The surviving ships limped back to Korea. Japan had survived. Barely. Japan prepares. The samurai understood what was coming. The Mongols would return. This had been a probe, a test. The next invasion would be larger. More ships, more soldiers, more of those terrible explosive weapons. Japan had perhaps 5 years, maybe less. Construction began immediately. The Genko Borui, a massive stone defensive wall, rose along the shores of Hakata Bay, 20 kilometers long, 2 meters high, designed specifically to stop amphibious landings, to deny the enemy the easy beachhead that had cost so many lives in 1274. You can still see sections of this wall today, still standing in Fukuoka, 750 years old, a scar on the landscape that remembers. Beat, but walls weren't enough. The samurai had to change how they fought. This proved harder. Some commanders experimented with group tactics, fighting in units, instead of as individuals, coordinating charges instead of seeking personal glory. But honor culture resisted. The samurai identity was built on individual combat. Asking warriors to abandon that, to become anonymous parts of a machine, cut against everything they believed. The compromises were imperfect. More arrows were stockpiled. Defensive positions were fortified. Temples and shrines became rally points. But the fundamental problem remained. Japan was preparing to fight the last war slightly better. The Mongols were preparing to end the war entirely. Kublai's second attempt, 7 years after the first invasion. Kublai Khan had finished conquering the southern Song dynasty. He now controlled all of China, its wealth, its shipyards, its inexhaustible manpower. And he had not forgotten the island that defied him. The second invasion would be overwhelming. 2 fleets, 2 departure points, a coordinated hammer blow that would crush Japan forever. The Eastern Route Fleet, launched from Korea, 900 ships carrying 40,000 troops. The Southern Route Fleet launched from conquered China, 3,500 ships carrying 100,000 troops. Read those numbers again. 140,000 soldiers, over 4,000 ships. If both fleets combined successfully, this would be the largest amphibious invasion in human history, a record that would stand until D-Day, 663 years later. Watch what happens next. The Eastern Fleet arrived first. June 1281. 40,000 troops approached Hakata Bay, expecting the same easy landing their predecessors had enjoyed 7 years earlier. They found the wall. The Genko Borui stretched across the beaches, stone barriers that turned open sand into a killing ground. Mongol soldiers who tried to land faced samurai firing down from fortified positions. Boats that reached the shore couldn't establish a beachhead. The easy victory wasn't coming. For weeks, the Eastern Fleet lingered offshore. Commanders launched raids. Japanese coastal defenders struck back with small boat attacks. Samurai rowing out at night to board Mongol vessels, fighting in the cramped darkness where individual combat actually worked. The invasion stalled. Where was the Southern Fleet? 100,000 reinforcements were supposed to arrive. Weeks passed. No sails on the horizon. The Southern Fleet had been delayed. Coordination between 2 massive naval forces across hundreds of miles of ocean, without radio, without reliable communication, had failed. The timing was off by months. By August, the Southern Fleet finally appeared, thousands of ships joining the Eastern force. The combined armada anchored near Takashima, in Imari Bay. 140,000 soldiers, 4,000 ships, packed into a confined anchorage. The hammer was finally raised, August 15th, 1281. The weather changed. Sailors who knew the sea recognized the signs. Pressure dropping. Swells, building. Wind shifting in ways that meant something terrible was coming. A typhoon was bearing down on Imari Bay. The storm hit on the night of August 15th and raged into August 16th. This wasn't the autumn gale of 1274. This was a full typhoon, a spinning monster of wind and water that turned Imari Bay into a graveyard. 4,000 ships, packed together at anchor. nowhere to run. The first vessels to break apart were the flat-bottomed river transports, Chinese ships designed for calm waters, pressed into ocean service for the invasion. They capsized in the swells, spilling soldiers into black water. Then the larger ships began to collide. Anchors dragged, hulls smashed together, masts snapped and fell across crowded decks. By dawn, Imari Bay was a field of wreckage. Modern estimates put the destruction at 60 to 90% of the entire fleet, thousands of ships reduced to floating debris, and the soldiers, 140,000 men who had been preparing to conquer Japan, were dying by the tens of thousands, drowning in armor, crushed between colliding hulls, swept out to sea in the darkness. Those who made it to shore found no salvation. Samurai had been waiting for this moment for 7 years. They hunted survivors on the beaches, exhausted, disorganized men who had lost their weapons, their units, their commanders. The slaughter lasted for days. When it was over, conservative estimates suggest 50,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers were dead. Some historians put the number far higher. The invasion force that was supposed to end Japanese independence had been annihilated, not by samurai skill, but by nature itself. Everything they knew about warfare was obsolete, but the sea didn't care about tactics, the birth of a myth. The Japanese called the typhoon kamikaze, divine wind. The gods themselves had intervened, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, Hachiman, the god of war. The spirits of Japan had seen the invasion and sent destruction upon the enemy fleet. This was the story Japan told itself. This was the story Japan would tell for 700 years. Think about what this belief meant. Japan wasn't just lucky. Japan was chosen, protected, sacred. The divine wind proved that the islands were special, that no foreign power could ever truly conquer them. This myth became national identity. It shaped Japanese culture, Japanese religion, Japanese military thinking for centuries. It resurfaced in 1945, when young pilots flew explosive-laden aircraft into American warships. They called themselves kamikaze. They believed they were the divine wind reborn. That's how deep the memory of 1281 cut. Why the Mongols never returned. Kublai Khan received news of the disaster. The greatest invasion fleet ever assembled, destroyed in a single night. He ordered preparations for a third invasion. Engineers began designing new ships. Troop levies were discussed, but the Yuan dynasty was bleeding. Wars in Southeast Asia, rebellions in conquered territories. The economic cost of 2 failed invasions had been staggering. Ships, soldiers, supplies, all lost to Japanese waters. The third fleet was never built. Kublai Khan died in 1294, still planning, still dreaming of the island that defied him. His successors quietly abandoned the Japan project. There were easier enemies, closer problems. Japan would not face another foreign invasion for 664 years, until American forces landed in 1945. The arrow had been shot twice. Twice it had fallen short. What changed beat. The samurai survived, but something had broken. In the short term, Japan built more walls, trained slightly better, developed marginally improved coordination. But the honor culture remained. The belief in individual combat persisted. The fundamental lesson of 1274, that modern warfare required armies to fight as single organisms, was acknowledged but never fully absorbed. It would take centuries for Japan to truly modernize its military. The shock of 1274 planted seeds, but those seeds wouldn't flower until the 1500s, the 1600s, the Meiji Restoration of the 1800s. What did survive was the trauma and the pride. The Mongol invasions became Japan's founding myth of resilience. The nation that faced the unstoppable and endured. The islands the gods themselves protected. Takazaki Suenaga, The minor samurai who charged the beach at Hakata, took an arrow to the arm, and somehow survived, commissioned the Moko Shurai Ekotoba scrolls around 1293. His eyewitness account. His proof that he had been there, had fought, had bled. Those scrolls still exist. You can see his charge. You can see the explosions. You can see the moment Japanese warfare changed forever, frozen in ink and color, and off the coast of Takashima, beneath the waves, the shipwrecks wait. Anchors, helmets, swords, ceramic shells still packed with 700-year-old gunpowder residue. The physical proof that this wasn't legend. This happened. The wall still stands Fukuoka, Japan. Modern day. Sections of the Genko Borui remain. Weathered stone blocks running along the coastline where samurai once waited for ships that came twice and never came again. Tourists walk past. Some stop to read the plaques. Most don't understand what they're looking at. 20 kilometers of desperation. 2 meters of stone piled by warriors who had learned that honor doesn't stop arrows, that courage doesn't stop explosions, that everything they believed about war was wrong. They built the wall anyway. And somehow it worked. November 19th, 1274, 23,000 soldiers landed on Japanese soil. 900 ships darkened Hakata Bay. Weapons that Japan had no words for exploded across the beaches. The samurai who rode out that morning believed they were the greatest warriors in the world. By sunset, they knew they were 600 years behind. Everything they knew about warfare was obsolete. But Japan survived. Not because of skill, not because of honor, because of a storm that came when storms were needed, and a wall that held when walls were all that remained. The Genko Borui still stands. The scrolls still show the charge. The shipwrecks still hold their secrets beneath the waves. And somewhere in the foundations of Japanese identity, in the belief that the islands are protected, that the divine wind will always come, the memory of 1274 waits. The day the samurai learned that the world was larger than they knew. The day Japan almost ended. The day that changed everything